The story unfolds in a way that few expected, not through the noise of explosions or the visuals of military conflict, but through the quieter, more complex world of economics. At its core, this is a narrative about how decisions made under pressure can ripple through global systems in ways that even the most experienced planners may not fully anticipate. It is a situation where intentions and outcomes diverged sharply, creating a chain of consequences that continue to shape the broader picture. What makes this account particularly compelling is that it is grounded in publicly available statements from senior officials responsible for economic strategy. These are not anonymous sources or speculative interpretations, but direct remarks from individuals tasked with managing financial responses during a time of crisis. This gives the sequence of events a level of clarity that allows observers to trace how each decision contributed to the outcome. At the outset of the conflict, expectations were defined by speed and precision. The initial strategy relied on the idea that decisive action would quickly weaken Iran's leadership and military infrastructure. The assumption was that such an approach would lead to a rapid resolution, limiting both the duration of the conflict and its potential impact on global systems. In this framework, economic disruption was not expected to become a central issue. However, the response from Iran introduced a different dimension entirely. Rather than focusing solely on military engagement, the reaction extended into the economic sphere. One of the most significant actions was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but essential maritime route that carries a substantial portion of the world's oil supply. This move shifted the focus from battlefield developments to global market stability. The immediate effects of this closure were felt across energy markets. Oil tanker movement slowed dramatically, and uncertainty drove prices upward. For countries dependent on stable energy imports, this created a situation of growing concern. The possibility of sustained disruption raised questions about inflation, industrial output, and the overall health of the global economy. This development placed policymakers in a difficult position. The initial plan had not accounted for a prolonged disruption of such a critical supply route. As a result, attention turned toward finding a solution that could stabilize markets without escalating the situation further. The challenge was to address the economic impact while continuing to manage the broader conflict. In response, a strategy emerged that focused on increasing oil supply to counterbalance the disruption. This involved reconsidering existing sanctions that had previously limited the ability of certain countries to sell oil on the global market. The logic behind this approach was straightforward. By introducing additional supply, prices could be brought under control, reducing pressure on economies worldwide. Among the key elements of this plan was the decision to allow previously restricted oil reserves to enter the market. This included significant volumes that had been held in storage, ready to be sold if conditions permitted. By releasing these supplies, the intention was to create a buffer against the sudden drop in available neft passing through the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, discussions extended to the possibility of easing restrictions on Iranian oil itself. The reasoning was that allowing more oil to flow, regardless of its source, could help stabilize prices in the short term. This was seen as a temporary measure aimed at preventing a larger economic crisis from taking hold. While the plan appeared logical in theory, the real-world effects began to reveal a different story. As restrictions were lifted and oil entered the market, Iran was able to sell significant quantities that had previously been inaccessible. This resulted in a rapid increase in revenue, highlighting the unintended financial impact of the policy. The scale of this revenue generation was notable. Within a relatively short period, Iran earned billions of dollars from oil sales. This outcome stood in contrast to the original goal of limiting the country's financial resources. Instead of reducing economic capacity, the situation appeared to provide a substantial boost. To put this into perspective, the amount generated in a matter of days exceeded what Iran typically allocates to its military over an entire year. This comparison underscored the magnitude of the shift, illustrating how quickly economic conditions had changed as a result of policy adjustments. This development introduced a layer of irony that did not go unnoticed. Measures intended to stabilize the global economy and manage the effects of the conflict had, at the same time, strengthened the financial position of the very country those measures were initially designed to pressure. It was a clear example of how interconnected systems can produce outcomes that differ from expectations. As the situation evolved, attention turned to the broader implications. The focus was no longer solely on immediate financial gains, but on how these changes might influence the overall trajectory of the conflict. Economic strength can play a significant role in shaping strategic decisions, and the shift raised questions about long-term dynamics. Adding to the complexity were comments from major figures in the global financial sector. Observations from leadership within large investment institutions highlighted the potential consequences of ongoing instability in energy markets. These perspectives emphasize the connection between oil prices and broader economic health. One key concern was the possibility that sustained high oil prices could lead to a global economic slowdown. If energy costs remained elevated for an extended period, the impact could be felt across industries, affecting production, transportation, and consumer spending. This created a scenario in which the conflict's effects extended far beyond its immediate region. This perspective introduced a difficult dilemma. Ending the conflict without resolving the issue of the Strait of Hormuz could leave global markets exposed to continued volatility. At the same time, prolonging the situation carried its own risks, both economically and politically. The result was a sense of being caught between competing challenges. On one hand, there was a need to address the disruption to energy supplies. On the other, there was the reality that certain responses could produce unintended consequences. This tension became a defining feature of the situation. Looking at the broader picture, it became clear that the conflict had altered Iran's position within the global economy. Prior to these events, years of sanctions had limited its ability to participate fully in international markets. Access to financial systems and trade networks had been restricted, shaping the country's economic landscape. However, the changes brought about by the conflict began to shift this dynamic. As oil sales increased and new arrangements were made, Iran found itself more actively engaged in global trade. This marked a departure from the level of isolation that had previously defined its economic position. At the same time, the control of a critical maritime route added another layer of influence. The ability to affect the flow of energy resources placed Iran in a position of strategic importance. This influence extended beyond immediate financial gains, shaping interactions with other nations. Some countries adjusted their approach in response to these developments, engaging in negotiations related to energy access and transportation. These interactions reflected the changing balance within the system, as new realities influenced decision-making processes. Over time, the cumulative effect of these changes became more apparent. The longer the situation continued, the more opportunities arose for increased economic activity. This created a scenario in which ongoing conditions contributed to sustained financial benefits. Another aspect of the situation involved the potential introduction of transit-related charges. The idea of imposing fees on passage through the Strait of Hormuz added a new dimension to the economic landscape. Given the volume of resources moving through this route, even a small percentage could translate into substantial revenue. Estimates suggested that such measures could generate extremely large sums over the course of a year. When compared to pre-existing economic benchmarks, the scale of this potential income highlighted the significance of the shift that had taken place. Taken together, these developments illustrate how a series of decisions, each made in response to immediate challenges, can interact in complex ways. The outcome was not the result of a single action, but of multiple factors converging within a highly interconnected system. In the end, the situation serves as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of large-scale economic and geopolitical interactions. Plans are formed based on available information and expected outcomes, but real-world conditions often introduce variables that cannot be fully controlled. What began as an effort to achieve a specific objective evolved into a broader scenario with far-reaching implications. The financial dimension of the conflict became just as significant as the military one, shaping perceptions and influencing future considerations. As events continue to unfold, the long-term impact remains a subject of close observation. The interplay between economic policy, global markets, and geopolitical strategy ensures that the situation will remain relevant for some time. Ultimately, this story highlights the importance of understanding how interconnected systems operate. Actions taken in one area can produce effects in another, sometimes in ways that challenge initial assumptions. It is within this complexity that the true significance of the situation becomes clear.